I was lounging on a worn leather sofa in the fraternity's common room, my eyes closed, drifting in the quiet afternoon haze, when his voice cut through the silence. It barely registered before my head exploded with a torrent of sounds and images, a blinding migraine of a life that wasn't mine. My eyes flew open, meeting the glacial stare of Elias Vance, and a cold sweat broke out across my skin. It was only then I realized my head was resting on his thigh. I shot up like a spring, the leather groaning in protest. So that's why he always looked at me with that undercurrent of simmering violence. The villain was me. Elias got to his feet in one fluid motion, his expression unreadable. He stated that he was leaving. I watched him, momentarily struck again by the sharp, severe lines of his profile. He was handsome in a way that seemed almost out of place here, too refined for this world of cheap beer and inherited wealth. I found myself lost in the thought for a beat. Apparently, in my past life, I had a weakness for a handsome face. He refused to look at me directly, his jaw tight with a barely concealed aversion. A cool, clinical voice echoed in my mind, informing me that Elias's approval rating for the host was currently negative 30%. That hardly came as a surprise. Elias was waiting for my dismissal. I quickly told him he could go. He shot me a look of faint surprise. According to the memories now flooding my brain, the original Mason would have used this post-nap moment to torment Elias, pushing him to his breaking point before finally letting him leave for class. He clearly didn't trust this sudden act of mercy. To maintain character, I let a cruel smirk spread across my face and asked him if he wanted to stick around, maybe for another round of negotiations. The look in his eyes instantly turned to one of profound disgust. He announced his departure again, his voice sharp. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I went to the attached bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. The reflection in the mirror was a pale, dripping visage, about 80% my own but with eyes that were startlingly clear, untouched by the weariness of a life lived. They held a kind of arrogant innocence born of privilege, a look that felt alien to me. I posed a question to the system in my head, asking what approval rating I needed to reach to avoid Elias's eventual retaliation. The voice replied with cool precision that a rating above 50% was required. That seemed achievable, the level of a casual friend, but considering my starting point and the need to stay in character, it presented a considerable challenge. After a moment of contemplation, guided by my inherent desire to take the path of least resistance, I asked the system how long I had if I simply did nothing. 3 years, it responded. 3 years until payback. Fine. It was just an approval rating. I could do this. The system then helpfully informed me that my afternoon seminar on macroeconomics was a prime opportunity, as both Elias and Leo would be in attendance. It was a chance I shouldn't miss. As I walked across the manicured lawns of the campus, the story pieced itself together in my mind. On my way, I was intercepted by a group of guys in basketball jerseys, bouncing a ball between them. They were Mason's crew, a pack of entitled legacy kids. They were inseparable from the whole mess with Elias. 6 months ago, Elias was just a sophomore, not yet the titan of industry he was destined to become. He was a scholarship student, working 2 jobs with no power or influence. His friend, Leo Kent, had lost a staggering amount of money to the original Mason in a high-stakes poker game he couldn't afford to be in. The rich kids, bored and looking for entertainment, suggested Leo work off the debt as Mason's personal slave, threatening to get him expelled otherwise. Leo had a breakdown, threatening suicide, but Elias talked him down. Elias then came to Mason with all his savings, hoping to negotiate a grace period, promising to help his friend pay back every cent. The original Mason, who had never encountered such selfless loyalty, was intrigued. He told Elias that if he was so noble, he could take his friend's place. The debt would be considered paid when Mason got bored of him. With no other choice, Elias agreed. He had a face that belied his humble background, an aristocratic handsomeness that Mason loved to see twisted in expressions of humiliation. For 6 months, he'd been subjected to an endless variety of cruel tasks and demeaning errands. Elias was already juggling a full-course load and multiple jobs, secretly building a startup with a small team. Mason's demands ate up what little time he had left, stripping him of his dignity. It was no wonder he became so ruthless later on. Once he was free, he built a corporate empire with astonishing speed, its reach extending across the globe. He didn't just ruin the original Mason. He systematically dismantled the family fortunes of every single one of the guys now jogging toward me. A classic tale of not judging a book by its cover. By the time I finished my internal recap, the pack had reached me. Chad, the loudest of the bunch, slung a sweaty arm around my neck and asked with a leer how my nap was, wondering if Elias had taken good care of me. I shot him a look that I hoped conveyed the message, "You are sealing your own doom," and shrugged him off with a complaint about the smell of his sweat. He feigned surrender, grumbling that I was never this picky before. My friends followed me into the tiered lecture hall through the back entrance. My eyes immediately found Elias in the front rows. He sat with a perfectly straight back, a stark contrast to the slumping posture of his sleep-deprived peers. Even the back of his head was handsome. I noticed a guy in the seat in front of him surreptitiously glancing back at us, then quickly ducking his head when he saw me looking. Elias's back stiffened for a fraction of a second before relaxing. A man of immense self-control. I confirmed with the system that the peaking student was indeed Leo. The system provided a brief, stating that Leo used to be a busboy at an exclusive downtown club. During one of Mason's visits, he'd left a vintage Cartier watch worth over $100,000 on a table. Leo had swept it into a bin, later selling it to a pawn shop for a paltry $2,000. The club's internal investigation quickly uncovered the theft. The pawn shop owner denied everything, and Leo was fired, left on the hook for the full value of the watch. It was a messy situation. I asked if I could just forgive the debt and solve the problem at its source. The system advised against it, classifying such an action as a severe deviation that could destabilize this world's narrative. A more subtle approach was necessary. During the mid-class break, I kicked the foot of Chad, who had been playing games on his phone for the entire lecture, telling him to let me out. He asked if I was going to the restroom and suggested we go together after his match so he could have a smoke. I ignored him, vaulting over the desktop with one smooth motion. Chad's jaw dropped. The students in the aisle parted for me as I descended the steps to the front row. I rapped my knuckles on the desk next to Leo. I told the student sitting there to move. The seat was cleared in seconds. Elias, sitting on the inside, didn't move a muscle, but his fingers tightened around his pen. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy with tension. It was common knowledge on campus that the untouchable Elias Vance was enduring my bullying to protect his friend. The burning stares I could feel on my back were a testament to their sympathy for him and their loathing for me. After sitting down, I propped my chin on my hand and openly admired Elias's profile for a moment. He didn't look at me, but the slight tremor in his long eyelashes was visible. He murmured that I had promised not to bother him during class. I replied softly that it was currently break time. His lips pressed into a thin, hard line, his expression growing colder. I smiled faintly and then, in a voice just loud enough to be heard by those nearby, I spoke his name. I told him to come to my place tonight, that I had a job for him. The air seemed to freeze. Before Elias could react, Leo spun around in his seat, his face contorted in rage. He shouted my name, his voice cracking. He demanded to know how I could be so cruel, asking if having a rich family gave me the right to bully people. He spat that without my family, I was nothing. The professor hadn't returned yet, so the lecture hall was silent save for his trembling voice. His eyes were red, and with his pale, delicate features, he looked like a cornered animal, inspiring a strange sort of pity. Even Elias looked at him with surprise. I raised an eyebrow. Leo had walked right into it. I plucked the pen from Elias's hand, twirling it between my fingers as I spoke in a slow, deliberate tone. I swore on my life that I didn't bully people randomly. I then reminded Leo about the matter of my stolen vintage watch, the one he'd pawned off for pennies, leaving him with a 6-figure debt. I asked if he'd forgotten that. Or perhaps, I mused, he had forgotten that he was the one who threatened to kill himself rather than pay it back, and that Elias had willingly taken his place to save him. I asked if this was the first he was hearing of it. Leo's pupils constricted. A dark flush crept up his neck as he instinctively tried to deny it, but his voice lacked any conviction. The other students began to murmur amongst themselves, exchanging shocked glances. They had only known the surface story. Leo had somehow offended me, and Elias was taking the heat for him. Now, hearing the truth from my own lips, they were stunned. If the original Mason was an arrogant bully, then Leo was a foolish, greedy, and selfish coward. Elias's current predicament wasn't solely my creation. Leo was half to blame. He committed the crime but refused to face the consequences, hiding behind an innocent friend. Elias never mentioned the details, so Leo pretended to be ignorant of the daily humiliations his friend was suffering, offering only hollow thanks and apologies to soothe his own conscience. Now, confronted with the truth in public, he could no longer hide. His verbal assault was a calculated move. He knew the original Mason was too proud and disdainful to explain himself. He'd hoped to provoke me into an over-the-top reaction, turning the crowd's sentiment against me and allowing him to fade into the background as a righteous victim. It was a truly despicable tactic. I gave him a cold look and upped the ante. I suggested that if his conscience was bothering him so much, perhaps he should take Elias's place. It was all the same to me who ran my errands. Leo's face went white. All his previous bravado vanished, and he stammered, unable to form a coherent response. He looked desperately to Elias for help. Elias's right hand was still poised as if holding the pen. His initial surprise had faded, replaced by a calm, unreadable expression. As he felt Leo's pleading gaze, his hand slowly clenched into a fist, crushing the air within his palm. He finally spoke, his voice low. "Everyone makes mistakes." Leo's eyes lit up. Elias was defending him. Elias continued, his gaze lowered. He told Leo he knew he was worried, but that he was fine. He then told him to turn around, as class was about to start. He took another pen from his case and went back to the notes on his desk, saying nothing more. The light in Leo's eyes died. He quickly scanned the room, his face growing even paler as he registered the looks of condemnation and contempt from his classmates. Just then, a pleasant chime sounded in my head. Elias's approval rating had increased by 20%. The current rating was now -10%. The system offered its congratulations. After class, Elias glanced at me once before leaving without a word. A devastated Leo trailed after him. I checked with the system if my actions had been too out of character. It assured me I was within safe parameters. I told it that its analysis was spot on. I had intentionally made the suggestive comment to Elias to provoke Leo, forcing him to expose his selfish nature. No matter how selfless Elias was, seeing his friend's true colors would be a harsh blow. Their friendship would never be the same. The system praised my brilliant manipulation of human psychology, predicting a swift completion of my mission. I quickly told it not to jinx me. Once the situational factors were stripped away, what remained was pure, unadulterated loathing, and that would be much harder to overcome. The campus walkways, shaded by tall sycamores, were filled with vibrant, energetic young people. Felt like I'd stepped back in time. My previous life had been a blur of corporate drudgery, and I sometimes missed my college days. But the thought of sharing a cramped dorm room with 3 other people, with no privacy whatsoever, made my skin crawl. The original Mason, however, owned a 2,000-square-foot luxury condo near campus. Rich people really did have it all. That night, after a shower, I lay on my king-sized bed researching my current major. Even if I planned to coast, I at least needed to graduate. The undergraduate coursework wasn't too deep. Passing shouldn't be too hard. It just wasn't a field I found interesting. Suddenly, the system's voice echoed in my head, informing me that at 10 the next morning, Elias would be meeting with an investor at the Velvet Room, a restaurant near campus. It suggested this was a prime opportunity to increase my approval rating. A jolt went through me. This was a major plot point. At 8 the next morning, I was in the campus dining hall, yawning over a bowl of oatmeal. Soon, a few of my bleary-eyed friends joined me, complaining about the terrible breakfast and my absence from their drinking session the night before. Blake mentioned that I had missed quite a show. At the club they went to, a dancer on the aerial silks had started vomiting mid-performance, right above Chad. He got drenched. No one would give him a ride home, and Elias didn't answer his phone. He ended up walking. Chad kicked him under the table, cursing at him for abandoning him and declaring their friendship over. Blake then turned to me and asked if I had actually made Elias come over last night. I said no, I was just messing with him. Chad then grumbled about how Elias had dared to ignore his call, wondering if he had a death wish. I frowned slightly. Blake pointed out that Elias didn't owe Chad any money. So why would he listen to him? Without me there, he wouldn't give him the time of day. Chad shrugged, remarking that Elias was quite loyal to his master. I told them to drop his name in the future. They both looked at me surprised. Blake commented that he thought something was up yesterday when I seemed to be defending him. He asked if I was planning to let him go, and why. I feigned annoyance, asking when I had ever defended him. I claimed that the thieving idiot Leo had provoked me first, so I simply exposed him to everyone to make his life miserable. My friends laughed, agreeing that Leo was now a social pariah and that my words had been far more effective than a physical beating. I added that with all the attention on him, Leo might do something reckless, and we'd all get dragged into the mess, which would be hard to explain to our families. So, I had decided to back off and let them go. They both seemed to understand. To complete the performance, I leaned back in my chair and laughed nonchalantly, saying that I was mostly just bored of the whole thing. Elias was good-looking, but he was as interesting as a block of wood. I'd rather find some new entertainment than waste more time on him. They were convinced, and the conversation moved on. Our table was next to a thick structural column. As we got up to leave, my eyes accidentally met with someone who had been obscured by it. It was Elias. My blood ran cold. I screamed internally at the system, asking when he had arrived. The system hesitantly suggested it was probably around the time I called him uninteresting and a block of wood. Elias was wearing a crisp white shirt, his hair neatly styled. He glanced at me for only a second before looking down at his plate of food. I composed myself and walked over, dropping a folded piece of paper next to his hand. It was the original IOU. I told him this saved me the trouble of finding him. I spoke from above him, saying he could have the contract back, tear it up for all I cared. But he needed to make sure his friends stayed out of my sight, or I couldn't guarantee I wouldn't press charges. Without waiting for a reaction, I turned and left, simultaneously asking the system for an update. It informed me that after a scan, there was no change. Still negative 10%. I'd given him his freedom and not even a single point. Unbelievable. But I had another plan. According to the original story, before Elias made his fortune, he suffered one major setback. It happened early in his startup phase when he was seeking investment. A crooked venture capitalist tricked him into handing over a product prototype. The investor then had his own R&D team reverse engineer it, slap a new name on it, and launch it first, quickly dominating the market. Elias and his team were left with nothing. A small startup couldn't fight a major corporation with a team of lawyers. Although they eventually found a new path to unprecedented success, at the time, the incident nearly destroyed them. And today was the day Elias was scheduled to meet that very investor. Their meeting was at 10. I arrived early and sat in the first-floor cafe for 5 minutes before Elias walked in. He was with a guy in thick glasses carrying a laptop bag. A waiter led them to a private room upstairs. I finished my coffee and stood up. A different waiter immediately approached me and led the way. I walked slowly up the stairs. Catching a thief was about to become a specialty of mine. I pushed open the door to the private room just in time to hear a man inside saying that his firm had invested in hundreds of projects. They wouldn't risk their reputation over one small deal. He was reassuring Elias, telling him to just send over the demo so he could show it to the board. Once they saw how well it worked, the investment would be a sure thing. The speaker was a well-dressed, middle-aged man in the main seat. Elias looked hesitant, his hand hovering over his phone. When the door opened, both of them looked over. Upon seeing me, Elias's face hardened with suspicion. The middle-aged scammer asked impatiently who I was. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, and retorted by asking who he was. The waiter beside me quickly explained to the man that there had been a glitch in their booking system. This room had been reserved yesterday by Mr. Chase. He politely asked if they would mind moving. Hearing the name Chase, the scammer looked confused for a second, then his expression shifted to one of shock. He immediately stood up, assuring us it was no problem at all and that he and Elias would clear out for the young Mr. Chase. Elias silently began to gather his things. I told them not to bother. I explained that Elias and I were classmates and they should stay for a meal. Since they were discussing venture capital, I offered to help him vet the deal. The scammer's expression froze. Elias then spoke, his voice cold, saying that it wasn't necessary. We weren't close. The scammer laughed, trying to smooth things over, insisting that such a small matter wasn't worth my time and that they wouldn't disturb my meal. As he was about to lead Elias away, a sharp female voice cut through the hallway. Ian Miller. It seems you haven't learned your lesson about stealing other people's work. Everyone turned to look. A woman in a sharp business suit with long hair was striding down the hall. At the sight of her, the scammer's face turned ashen. The woman had her arm around the shoulder of Elias's nerdy friend, who looked so flustered he could barely walk straight. I said disapprovingly that she was late. She just smiled, saying that timing was everything. She explained that she had overheard some kid on the phone in the lobby, talking about an investor demanding a software demo. It gave her PTSD, so she had to intervene. She said my presence saved her an explanation. She patted the nerdy friend's shoulder and told him to go, advising him not to be so naive in the future. The friend nodded obediently and went to Elias, whispering something in his ear. Elias's expression hardened. He looked at the woman and asked if she was Isabel Reed, the CEO of Synergy Tech. Isabel nodded, confirming that she was a former victim of the man standing next to him, a serial thief of startup innovations. The scammer, Ian Miller, was sweating profusely. He sputtered that Isabel was slandering him and demanded proof. Isabel just scoffed, not even bothering to reply. Miller then met Elias's icy gaze and flinched. Knowing he'd lost all credibility, even the waiter was looking at him with disdain. He made a hasty retreat, shouting back a threat about lawsuits and seeing them in court. I shook my head. Some people never learn. Elias thanked Isabel sincerely. She waved it off, saying that when you've been caught in the rain, you want to hold an umbrella for others. She advised them not to be starstruck by big firms and to be wary of unreasonable demands. Elias and his friend nodded gratefully. I impatiently urged them along, asking if we were going to eat or not. Isabel quickly excused herself from the two young men and followed me into the private room, exclaiming that I had invited her to try the new menu and that we should order everything. I had put in a lot of effort to arrange that coincidental meeting and save Elias from disaster, yet my approval rating hadn't budged an inch. All that work for nothing. I grumbled internally. Couldn't Elias have felt just a little bit of gratitude toward me as well? Without me, Isabel would never have been there. The man's heart must be made of iron. I asked the system if this was a hopeless situation. It encouraged me not to lose heart, reminding me that 6 months of humiliation had created deep-seated resentment that wouldn't vanish overnight. There was still time. That was true. I was starting to realize that Elias wasn't just a character to be manipulated, but a real person in this world. Human relationships were complex. Forcing things could backfire. Since I had time, I decided to let things unfold naturally. In other words, I was giving up for now. The system immediately panicked, insisting that, with my current approval rating, giving up was a death sentence. I would have tried harder, but Elias had been absent from campus lately. The system then informed me that his grandmother was sick and he had been at the hospital with her. This guy's life was one tragedy after another. As I was contemplating how to use this to my advantage, something cool tapped my forehead. I jolted back to the present. I was in the formal dining room of the Chase family estate. Across the table, the handsome, imposing man who was my older brother, Julian Chase, lowered his silver spoon. His brow was furrowed as he stared at me with his inscrutable eyes. He said he had been asking me a question. He wanted to know why I was so distracted. This man was Julian Chase, the head of the Chase family's corporate empire. He also had another, more critical role in this story. He was the other male lead. The original novel was a story of salvation. In the darkest period of Elias's life, bullied by rich kids, his startup failing, his grandmother's health declining, Julian had offered him a job and an interest-free loan from the company for his grandmother's heart surgery. Julian was powerful and beautiful, and despite being my brother, Elias fell hopelessly in love with him. This love became his motivation to rebuild his life and achieve greatness. Their story was an epic romance that readers adored. Meanwhile, I, the villain, continued on my path of self-destruction. Instead of clinging to my powerful brother for protection, I later tried to stage a corporate coup against him. This gave Elias the perfect excuse to crush me, leaving me ruined and disgraced, destined to die of an overdose on a foreign street. Horrifying. I used to feel a little guilty about potentially derailing Elias and Julian's love story. But now I had a new perspective. He was only losing a boyfriend, whereas I was about to lose my life. Priorities. Julian, completely unaware of my inner turmoil, was still waiting for an answer. I quickly grabbed his hand that was resting on the table and gave it a placating shake. I told him not to be angry, that a friend was moving abroad and I was just thinking about him. I asked what he had said. Julian glanced down at my hand on his, and the tension in his brow eased slightly. He asked if I was also thinking of going abroad. I pulled my hand back and explained that I didn't like my current major and wanted to study something else, maybe fine art, like painting. I told him I was still thinking about it and asked for his advice, looking at him with what I hoped was an expression of pure trust. His face remained impassive. He reminded me that not long ago, I was eager to join the company and help him. He asked what had changed. I gave a weak laugh and admitted that he knew me better than anyone, that I was no good at business and had decided it was best not to run our family's empire into the ground. My stark self-awareness seemed to surprise him, a crack appearing in his composed demeanor. He frowned, telling me not to talk about myself that way, that I was as capable as anyone. After a moment, he asked if someone had influenced this decision. I looked at him blankly, asking if I needed someone else's influence to know my own limitations. He looked resigned. He said he would start looking into study abroad programs for me, but that there was no rush. I nodded obediently. I took Julian's car back to campus. On the way, the system chimed in, noting that the hospital where Elias's grandmother was staying was nearby. Suggested I pay a visit. I asked the driver to drop me at the next corner. I told Julian that a classmate was sick and I was going to visit them. Julian looked up from his tablet, his cool, elegant eyes meeting mine. He smelled faintly of a pleasant, woody cologne. He gave a slight nod and told me to go, asking me to send him a message when I got back to campus. After I got out, I could see the white hospital building in the distance. The inpatient wing was to the south, with a small garden at its base. The weather was nice, and several patients in wheelchairs were out enjoying the sun. I wondered if Elias's grandmother was among them. I wandered around the garden paths but found no sign of them, so I decided to go inside and ask. As I was leaving the garden, I nearly collided with Elias, who was pushing his grandmother in a wheelchair. He froze for a second, then gave me a curt nod, preparing to walk past me. I hadn't even had a chance to say my prepared lines. I instinctively reached out to stop him, but a frail, bony hand grabbed my wrist first. I flinched and looked down into a pair of clouded eyes. Elias's grandmother stared at me, a strange light igniting in her milky eyes. Tears welled up as her lips trembled. "Lily," she whispered. "You're back." I was stunned. "Lily?" Elias quickly pulled her hand away from me, murmuring that she was mistaken, that I wasn't Lily. The old woman looked up at me in confusion. "Not Lily?" she asked, her voice filled with sudden panic. "Then where is Lily? Where is my daughter?" Elias was silent for a moment before gently reminding her that she had left many years ago. The old woman's face crumpled, and she let out a cry of anguish, insisting that he was lying. She cried that Lily would never leave her mother. She tried to stand up from the wheelchair, grabbing the armrests for support. The wheel slipped, and she lost her balance, pitching forward toward the hard concrete. With her fragile health, a fall like that could be devastating. The wheelchair blocked Elias, but I reacted instantly. I lunged forward, catching the old woman and breaking her fall with my own body, my back hitting the pavement with a dull thud. I let out a sigh of relief and looked up at Elias. His face was ghost white. After they got her back in the chair, she was still agitated, struggling in his arms until a nurse administered a sedative. I stood at a distance, brushing the dust off my jacket. A chime echoed in my head. Elias's approval rating had increased by 5%. Current rating, -5%. I paused, my hand hovering over my jacket, and looked up to meet Elias's complicated gaze from across the lawn. He was about to look away when I pointed behind me, indicating that I was leaving. He hesitated, then nodded. I slung my jacket over my shoulder and walked away. A week later, I was woken in the dead of night by a phone call. I answered irritably, asking who it was. There was silence on the other end. I was about to hang up when a low, hoarse voice spoke. "It's Elias Vance." I was instantly awake, my heart pounding with the fear that something had happened to his grandmother. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked him what he wanted. He spoke with difficulty, asking if I could possibly come to the hospital to see his grandmother. A heavy silence fell between us. He seemed to have expected a refusal, murmuring an apology and preparing to hang up. I asked if he meant right now. He paused, then confirmed. I didn't ask any more questions, just told him I was on my way and to text me the room number. After hanging up, I rushed to get ready. It was 3 a.m, impossible to get a cab. I stood shivering on the curb until I broke down and called my family's driver to pick me up. The hospital corridors were brightly lit. A nurse informed me that the grandmother had suffered severe post-operative complications and had never been out of critical condition. She had woken from a coma that evening, disoriented and calling for Lily. They gave her a sedative, but a few hours later, she went into cardiac arrest. They had managed to revive her, but she was fading fast. The doctor said she might not make it through the night. The room smelled faintly of decay. I sat in the chair Elias offered me, looking at the frail old woman on the bed. Despite the heating, I was shivering. I rubbed my hands together to warm them and gently took hers. She slowly opened her eyes and looked at me. After a moment of confusion, a soft light filled her clouded eyes. "Lily," she said, "you came." I nodded, tucking a stray strand of white hair behind her ear. She tried to squeeze my hand, her rough thumb stroking the back of mine. Behind me, Elias watched in silence. "My foolish child," she whispered, her voice weak but tender. "You finally came home." She told me she had raised Elias for me, that he didn't look like me at all, maybe more like his father. She asked if I had stayed away because I was afraid she would be angry. She assured me she wasn't, that her home was always my home. She told me not to be afraid, that she would protect me. The appearance of Lily seemed to soothe her. She fell into a peaceful sleep, her vital signs stabilizing. I turned and met Elias's gaze, which was filled with overwhelming relief. My job was done. Waiting for the elevator, I stared at the red numbers overhead, realizing I'd forgotten to press the button. Just as I reached out, a hand darted past mine and pressed it for me. I turned. It was Elias. He glanced at me once, then faced the closed doors. He said he would walk me out. The elevator arrived empty. The display showed the time was 4:10 a.m. As the exhaustion hit me, I heard Elias speak in a low voice beside me. He thanked me for tonight. I looked at him, thinking that the best thanks he could give me would be to hate me a little less. I asked out of curiosity if I really looked that much like his mother. The original story never mentioned it. Elias hesitated, then said there was a resemblance in the eyes. I asked if he had noticed it from the start. He seemed about to say something more, but the elevator stopped on the 4th floor. The doors opened to a rush of nurses shouting for us to make way as they wheeled a patient on a gurney inside. We were pushed into a corner, me pressed against Elias with my back to his chest, and 4 stand pinning me in place. The warmth radiating from his body jolted me fully awake. I couldn't imagine what his face looked like, being forced into such close contact with someone he despised. I prayed my approval rating wouldn't drop. When we finally reached the ground floor, I quickly moved away from him and stepped out of the elevator first. As I crossed the lobby, pulling out my phone to call the driver, I saw a familiar figure in a tailored suit standing at the entrance. Julian? What was he doing here? I glanced back at Elias. Was this it? Was their love story about to begin? I walked out quickly and called out to my brother. Julian turned, a faint smile touching his lips when he saw me. Then his eyes shifted to Elias, who had followed me out, and his expression faltered, his eyebrows rising slightly. I was witnessing a love-at-first-sight moment. I swallowed hard. I was about to sneak a look at Elias's reaction when Julian shook out the heavy coat in his hands and told me to come here. I walked over to him. He was radiating a cold air, as if he'd been standing outside for a long time. His signature scent of sandalwood was sharp in the chilly night. He draped the coat over my shoulders. I looked up at him and asked why he was here. He gave me a look and asked coolly why I was dragging our driver, Lee, out in the middle of the night instead of being asleep in bed. So Lee was a tattletale. But then I realized he was the perfect wingman. I decided to take the baton from him. I turned and waved Elias over. He approached silently. I made the introductions. This is my classmate Elias Vance. This is my brother Julian Chase. I explained that Elias's grandmother was sick and I had come to visit. Julian nodded, offering polite condolences and asking about her condition before handing Elias a business card. He told him to call if he needed anything. He then added, with a subtle glance at me, that it was rare to see his little brother so concerned about someone. I mentally applauded him. He was so smooth, giving out his number just like that. He totally deserved a handsome boyfriend. Elias looked down at the card, his face obscured by shadows. He took it and put it in his pocket, thanking him. Julian announced that we were leaving. I gave Elias a small chin lift, a silent goodbye. He nodded. As I walked with Julian toward the car, a chime rang in my head. The system announced that Elias's approval rating had increased by 40%. The current rating was now 30%. It offered its congratulations. I stared in disbelief. Did I hear that right? How did it jump so much? The system theorized that my kindness toward his grandmother had moved him, showing him that I wasn't entirely rotten. As a result, his approval rating had soared. I instinctively glanced back and saw Elias still standing there, watching us. The moment our eyes met across the distance, another chime. Elias's approval rating had increased by another 10%. Current rating, 40%. Unbelievable. Was he so happy to meet his future husband that he was granting a general amnesty? As I puzzled over it, Julian took my hand. I turned to look at him, his dark, handsome eyes meeting mine. He told me to watch where I was going or I would trip. Thanks to him, my rating had skyrocketed. I felt lighthearted and leaned against his arm affectionately, telling him that I had him to watch out for me. He sighed my name, a hint of resignation in his voice. With my mission seemingly on the verge of success, my plans to study abroad were fast-tracked. To maximize my opportunities to see Elias, I started attending every single one of my classes, much to the shock of Chad and the others. One day, I arrived late and the back rows were all taken. Not wanting to squeeze in, I was about to skip class, but as I walked past the front row on my way out, Elias cleared the seat next to him and looked at me pointedly. With everyone watching, I had no choice but to sit down. After class, I learned my approval rating had gone up by another 5%. I figured my diligent student act must have impressed him. After all, what harm could a dedicated learner possibly do? Even the other students had started to warm up to me, no longer treating me like a pariah. Someone even invited me to join their group project. Things were looking up. My old friends, finding their invitations for debauchery repeatedly declined, eventually got bored and started showing up to class with me. One afternoon, as we were leaving the lecture hall, we noticed a commotion, with students running toward the skywalk connecting our building to the library. Chad, still groggy from a nap, wondered aloud if there was a fire. Blake grabbed a passing student and asked what was happening. The student breathlessly explained that someone was threatening to jump from the library roof. We were all surprised but didn't move. Then Chad glanced at his phone and looked up at me, his face pale. He whispered that it was Leo. My eyes widened. We were on the 4th floor of the Arts and Sciences building, directly across from the library. I knew Leo didn't have the guts to actually jump. This was just another one of his manipulative schemes. Still, I couldn't just ignore it. I pushed my way to the railing on the skywalk, which offered a clear view of the opposite roof. A figure was perched on the edge. It was indeed Leo, looking frail and unsteady in a loose white t-shirt. A cardboard sign hung around his neck, the words scrawled in thick red letters. Mason Chase, heir to Chase Industries. I.S. a bully. If the university does nothing, I will die for justice. I frowned. He was trying to take me down with him. I could feel the eyes of the crowd on me, their whispers like boiling water. I overheard someone say they heard Leo had stolen something from me first, that he was the one in the wrong. The tide of opinion was shifting. Suddenly, someone yelled across the chasm, "Who are you trying to scare? If you've got the guts, then jump." I cursed under my breath and shot a look at Chad. He understood and, before the taunts could escalate, dragged the idiot away. Down below, university officials had arrived. A professor was on a megaphone, pleading with Leo to value his life and not do anything rash. They would probably send someone he knew up to talk to him. Just as I thought that, I saw a second figure appear on the roof behind Leo. It was Elias. I froze. Their relationship was so strained now, I wasn't sure his presence would help. My fears were confirmed. After a brief exchange, Leo became visibly agitated. His shouts carried across the gap. "He tortured you. Why are you still defending him? Are you some kind of masochist?" I couldn't hear what Elias said next, but Leo suddenly clapped his hands over his ears and screamed for him to shut up. The next moment, as everyone watched in horror, he twisted his body, lost his balance, and slipped. A collective gasp went through the crowd. For a horrifying second, Leo was suspended in midair. Then his fall was arrested. Everyone looked up and drew a sharp breath. Elias was hanging over the edge of the roof, his fingers clamped around one of Leo's wrists. Most of his upper body was over the ledge, and it looked like he could be pulled over at any second. People were screaming, asking where the fire department was, yelling that someone was going to die. The moment Leo fell and was caught, I broke through the crowd. I ran into a nearby classroom and tore a heavy velvet curtain from its rod. Then I sprinted across the skywalk toward the library. The building had 5 floors, and the emergency responders were only just arriving below. My route was the fastest. I took the stairs 3 at a time and slammed my shoulder into the heavy metal door leading to the roof. I saw Elias at the edge. One hand was braced against the low parapet, but his body was still sliding dangerously. "Elias!" I yelled. "Hold on." I rushed to his side and threw the twisted curtain down to Leo. "Grab it." Leo was pale and drenched in cold sweat. His terrified eyes locked on me. He glanced at the makeshift rope, then shakily reached out and grabbed it. Together, Elias and I hauled him up. I was soaked in sweat, bent over with my hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath. Beside me, Elias lay on the ground, gasping for air. He turned his head and looked at me. The cause of all this, Leo, was slumped against the wall, barely able to speak but still managing to spit venom at me. "You think this makes me forgive you? Dream on." Hearing that, I straightened up, strode over, and grabbed him by the collar, hauling him to his feet. He shrieked in terror, "What are you doing?" His words were cut off as my fist connected with his jaw, snapping his head to the side. I met his shocked gaze with a mocking smile and said in a low voice, "If I wasn't afraid you'd get Elias killed, you think I'd care if you lived or died?" He just stared at me blankly. I let go of his collar and shoved him back against the wall. "You said I bullied you? You need proof. I'll give you proof." I glanced toward the emergency personnel now rushing onto the roof and stuffed my hands in my pockets. "Go on," I said finally. "Play the victim and blame everyone else. It's what you're best at." I turned and my eyes locked with Elias's complex gaze. I froze. Hitting someone right in front of him, my approval rating was sure to plummet. My heart sank. Then a wave of anger washed over me. What was so special about Leo that Elias would pay his debts and risk his own life for him, nearly dragging me down with him? I was so frustrated that I ignored his stare and walked toward the stairs alone, ignoring the calls behind me. I had just descended one flight of stairs when I heard that familiar chime. I slowed down instinctively. Did it announce a decrease in approval rating too? To my surprise, what came first was the sound of popping fireworks. The system's voice, ecstatic, announced, "Elias Vance's approval rating has increased by 35%. Current rating, 80%. Congratulations, host. Mission complete. The threat of death has been eliminated. From this day forward, you can live in this world with peace of mind." I muttered a curse under my breath, completely stunned. Just then, a hand grabbed mine from behind. I turned. It was Elias, his chest heaving slightly, his eyes urgent and worried. I was taken aback and asked him what was wrong. He demanded to know why I had left without letting the medics check on me. I studied him for a moment before replying that I wasn't injured. I glanced at his arm, which was hanging limply at his side. "You're the one who needs a doctor, hero." Hearing my sarcastic tone, a look of shame crossed his face. I pulled my hand away and gave him one last look. "I'm leaving." As I continued down the stairs, the feeling of his intense gaze on my back eventually faded. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and my body felt so light I could float. The moment I stepped out of the building and into the sunlight, I shouted in my mind, "I'm free!" The jumping incident reached Julian. He came to the university and met with the administration and the other two involved parties. After that day, I stopped going to school. I didn't care about the aftermath. I spent months traveling the country before finally preparing to go abroad. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving, only posting a picture with my location tag once I landed. My social media was flooded with messages from Chad and Blake and the others, cursing me for being a heartless friend. I replied to all of them, "Daddy will miss you." That only made them curse me more. I lived and studied in Europe for 5 years and never once went back. Julian set me up with a housekeeper and a driver, and life was comfortable. Every Christmas and on my birthday, he would fly over to celebrate with me. The Chase family owned property all over the world, so we never spent a holiday in the same place twice. He visited far more often than that, usually on his private jet, a fact that would surely land him on an eco-terrorist's hit list. I wanted to tell him to visit less and worry more about his own love life. In recent years, Elias and his company had been appearing more and more in the international news. Whenever his name came up, Julian would immediately turn off the TV and casually ask what I wanted for dinner, offering to cook it himself. It was incredibly creepy. What was wrong with him? The whole situation was bizarre. But I only dared to complain internally. To Julian's face, I was always sweet and obedient. After all, he was my biggest supporter in this world. And he was a genuinely devoted brother. Having lost my parents early in a previous life, I had never really experienced that kind of familial warmth. Julian more than made up for it. After I had traveled my fill and seen the world, the thought of returning home began to surface. It was time to find a new place to relax, and maybe check in on my old friends, see if their families had gone bankrupt yet. I swear I wasn't just looking for drama. Surprisingly, when I told Julian I wanted to go home, he didn't seem as happy as I expected. But he didn't object. Instead, he started planning my first solo art exhibition back home. My luggage and paintings were shipped ahead. After my final farewell party, I headed to the airport. I was early for my flight and was waiting in the VIP lounge when I got a call from an unknown number. I answered. An excited voice on the other end said my name. "Mason, is that you?" The voice was familiar. I asked who it was. It was Chad. I was amazed. My phone had been stolen on the Paris metro shortly after I left, and I'd lost contact with everyone. "Long time no see, man," I said. "How'd you get my number?" Chad boasted that the curator for my exhibition was a close friend of his. He got my contact info from her and called me right away. I laughed, telling him not to bullshit me. If he had really wanted to get in touch, he wouldn't have waited 5 years. He paused, his tone becoming serious. He said I had no idea how possessive my brother Julian was, that they couldn't get any information about me at all. If he hadn't known the curator, he wouldn't even have known I was coming back. I was surprised. It's not like I had a price on my head. Why would Julian be so secretive? A strange feeling crept over me. I quickly called on the system, asking it to check Elias's current approval rating. The long dormant system responded quickly, stating that the current rating was 99%. 99%? We hadn't seen each other in 5 years. How did it get so high? It wasn't Elias who was the problem. I pressed Chad, asking him what he knew. I told him to be clear or I might not get on the plane. He quickly told me not to panic, that I'd been out of the country for a long time and didn't know what was going on. He said that Elias Vance was a huge deal now. Everyone in the city knows you're the one that got away for him. Your brother probably hid you so well to keep him away. I was silent for a moment, then told him I was done wasting my breath on him, and that he shouldn't call me again. Chad got agitated, insisting he was telling the truth. He said Elias couldn't find me, so he had come to him. When Chad told him he didn't know where I was, Elias didn't believe him and nearly drove his father's company into bankruptcy. He only backed off when he realized Chad really had no idea. Then, at an industry summit in front of all the biggest names and the media, Elias had walked up to my brother and asked, "Mr. Chase, you once told me I wasn't worthy of pursuing your brother. How about now?" Chad said everyone was stunned. My face twisted in disbelief. I accused him of making it all up, of reading too many novels. Julian had never mentioned any of this, and controlling my contact with the outside world seemed far too controlling for my composed, mature brother. Besides, how could I be Elias's great lost love? He and my brother were supposed to be together. Seeing my disbelief, Chad got desperate. He probably knows you're coming back. He runs this city now. Your brother might not even be a match for him. If he goes crazy and tries to kidnap you, don't say I didn't warn you. He was getting more and more ridiculous. I laughed and told him he was sick, projecting his own twisted fantasies. Just as I was about to ask if Elias knew he was spreading these rumors, a low voice sounded from somewhere other than my phone. "Tell me what?" An electric tingle went through me. I looked up and saw a tall, imposing man in a perfectly tailored suit standing before me. His handsome face was sharp and intense, his dark eyes unfathomably deep, now fixed on me with a flicker of amusement. I slowly widened my eyes. It was Elias. A final, triumphant chime. Elias Vance's approval rating has increased by 1%. Current rating, 100%. I was completely frozen. On the phone, Chad went silent for a second, then said gravely, "Brother, take care." He hung up. "Do you mind if I sit here?" Elias asked politely. It felt like a reunion of old friends, a silent truce. I treated it as a coincidence, shook my head, and gestured for him to sit. I made small talk, saying it had been a long time and asking if he was here on business. "No," he said. "I'm here for you." My face froze. He smiled faintly at my expression. "I've been going to Paris every month for the last few years," he confessed, "hoping I might run into you on some street corner. I didn't know you had moved to Italy." I asked why he didn't just call me. He just looked at me quietly, and I understood. It was really my brother, wasn't it? "I should have found you sooner," he said. All of Chad's wild stories suddenly clicked into place. This was too much. I immediately reached for my phone, ready to confront Julian. I was an adult. He had no right to decide who I could or couldn't see. But Elias's hand closed over mine, stopping me. I looked up at him, annoyed. Just then, an announcement for my flight echoed through the lounge. "Let's go," he said. "We can get on the plane first." Before I could process it, he was pulling me by the hand toward the gate. I was astonished. "You even have my flight information? Are you going to follow me onto the plane?" Elias gave me a half smile. "Scared already?" I scoffed. "Scared? I'm the bully here. You'd better watch out or I'll find some new leverage and make you my slave again." His grip on my hand tightened, and I saw his throat move as he swallowed. He leaned in and whispered, "You already have leverage over me." I asked what he meant. He turned to face me, his dark eyes like vortexes. "I'm in love with you. Crazy." In a few years, the man had learned how to be a smooth talker. My ears burned. I pulled my hand away and walked down the jet bridge by myself, finding my seat in first class. Elias's seat was just behind and to the right of mine, and I could feel his gaze on me. I had been up all night at the party, and I was exhausted. I ignored him, closed my eyes, and leaned back to rest. I dreamed I was having a furious argument with Julian, my brow furrowing in my sleep. In a half-conscious state, I felt a thin blanket being draped over me. A flight attendant, probably. I mumbled a thank you. When I opened my eyes again, we were already approaching the city. The sky outside the window was dark, the city lights below a river of gold. After we deplaned, Elias walked beside me. I was silent and he didn't press. There was a crowd at the arrival gate. I spotted Julian immediately, raising his wrist to check his watch. In the cool autumn air, he wore a black overcoat that made him look particularly remote and austere. 2 months had passed since we last saw each other. While I was still taking him in, he looked up and saw me. A familiar, warm smile spread across his face, and he beckoned me over. I hesitated for only a second before running and throwing myself into his arms. He hugged me tightly, stroking the back of my head. The comforting scent of sandalwood enveloped me, just like every other reunion. Unseen by me, Julian's and Elias's gazes met over my head, clashing like swords. I closed my eyes in Julian's embrace, then pulled away and looked back at Elias, who stood rooted to the spot, his face grim. "Come on," I called out to him. "Seeing my brother got you starstruck?" Both Elias's and Julian's expressions twisted for a second. Elias walked over, the temperature around us seeming to drop several degrees. He looked at Julian's cold expression and said with a hint of mockery, "Mr. Chase, any regrets?" Julian seemed to understand his meaning perfectly, replying coolly, "You seem to be in a hurry, Mr. Vance." "A lack of confidence, perhaps?" Elias gave a short laugh. "I admit I don't have much confidence. But that's better than having no right to compete at all." Julian's eyes darkened for a moment, then became sharper. He asked slowly, "And what if I don't intend to play by the rules?" Elias's expression faltered, and he started to say something, but I cut them both off, tired of their cryptic banter. "Brother," I said, "aren't you surprised I came back with him?" Elias fell silent, glancing at Julian. I saw Julian's fingers twitch at his side. He lowered his gaze, hiding the sharpness in his eyes, and turned to me with a gentle expression. "I haven't had a chance to ask," he said. "I was worried you'd be bored on the flight. It seems I worried for nothing." I looked at him and said softly, "Brother, I had a dream on the plane. I dreamed you had become someone I didn't recognize." Julian's gaze wavered, a flash of pain in his eyes. He said gently, "No matter what I become, I would never hurt you. You don't need to be afraid." I stared into his dark, luminous eyes and suddenly saw something there, an emotion that made my blood run both hot and cold. I paled, stammering his name. The next second, he reached out and tousled my hair roughly, forcing my head down. When I looked up again, his expression was back to normal, as if I had imagined it all. "You fool," he said with a soft, helpless tone. "I will always be your brother. Promise. Do you feel better now?" I stared at him, my eyes misting over. Julian looked away, toward the silent Elias, and said coolly, "We're going home. Are you going to follow us, Mr. Vance?" Elias looked at him with a complex expression, then smiled faintly. "No." He turned to me, his gaze softening. "Mason, I'll see you at your exhibition on Friday." I nodded, a little dazed. Elias left first. I followed Julian out of the airport. The house was ablaze with lights. As we entered, there was a loud pop, and colorful confetti rained down on me. "Welcome home, young master." The entire household staff was awake. The living room was filled with balloons and flowers, and a huge cake sat on a trolley. They threw a party hat on my head and pushed me toward the cake. Julian took a glass of champagne and sat on a sofa nearby, watching quietly. With cream smeared on my face, I looked across the crowd and met his eyes. He smiled, raising his glass in a toast. I read his lips. "Welcome home." A few days later, my exhibition opened at the city's most prestigious art museum. The entire upper echelon of society turned out. Congratulatory flower arrangements crowded the entrance hall, and every painting was sold before the evening reception. That afternoon, a convoy of a dozen brightly colored sports cars paraded to the museum, their sides spray-painted with the words, "The 5-year compact is fulfilled. Welcome home, Dragon King." I didn't need to guess who those idiots were. All day, I was showered with praise. By the evening's celebratory banquet, I was still floating. To preserve my mental health, I decided such events should be rare. I circulated with Julian, a glass of champagne in hand, making small talk with important industry figures, a business smile plastered on my face. Just then, the doors to the banquet hall opened, and Elias walked in, dressed in a sharp black suit. He paused at the entrance, his gaze sweeping the room. When he saw me, a genuine smile broke through his composed facade. I was about to wave him over when I noticed the atmosphere in the room had shifted. People were glancing back and forth between Elias and Julian. I remembered what Chad had said about their rivalry. I looked at Julian. He gave me a reassuring glance before walking toward Elias. He extended a hand and they shook. Then Julian turned to the room and announced that Mr. Vance of Vance Industries, a college friend of his younger brother, was here to show his support and that everyone should relax. He took 2 glasses of wine from a passing waiter, handed one to Elias, and clinked their glasses together. "Welcome. Thank you." The tension in the room eased. Someone bold enough joked, "Mr. Vance, are you here to see your long-lost love?" A ripple of knowing laughter went through the crowd. Elias smiled faintly at the man but didn't reply, his eyes finding mine again. Excusing himself, he crossed the room, walking straight toward me. I was standing by the doors to the terrace. As he approached, everyone else seemed to fade into the background. My heart began to pound. He stopped in front of me. I had to tilt my head up slightly to meet his gaze. In that moment, the world went silent. He started fumbling in his pocket. He looked calm, but he missed the pocket opening on his first try, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. Finally, he pulled out a folded sheaf of papers and handed them to me. It was the old slave contract. I looked at him, confused. "What's this? Revenge is a dish best served after 5 years?" He chuckled. "Of course not." He met my questioning gaze, his expression turning serious. He said in a low voice, "You have leverage over me. So I am still your slave." I studied him for a moment, then laughed. "Elias, all that time I was humiliating you. You secretly enjoyed it, didn't you?" His eyes darkened, and he started to deny it. But I placed a hand on his chest, feeling the frantic hammering of his heart beneath my palm. "This excited?" I murmured, looking up at him. "How long have you wanted me to treat you like this?" He grabbed my wrist, his grip tight, his voice hoarse. "Every night since you saved me on that rooftop. For 5 years." My ears buzzed. So he wasn't a masochist after all. I yanked my hand away, annoyed. "You're insane. Is this how you confess to someone?" He froze, a new light dawning in his eyes. "You think I'm confessing? So you're not against the idea of me loving you?" He was quick on the uptake now. I sighed, exasperated. "What is wrong with you?" He looked at me with an almost pathetic expression. "Someone told me I would only ever be trouble for you, that I didn't deserve to love you. And I think he was right. My love is worthless to you. I only deserve to be your slave." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Maybe I am sick, but I don't think being your slave would be so bad. In fact, it would be a privilege." I looked at him, my heart softening despite myself. I was about to say something when a loud pop sounded from behind me, followed by a series of crackles. I spun around to see the first golden firework exploding in the night sky. One after another, they blossomed, the sound echoing the fireworks in my head on the day I won my freedom. The colorful light illuminated our faces. I reached out and gently took his hand. He stiffened, looking at me in surprise. I met his gaze and smiled. "Whether you're worthy or not isn't for other people to decide." I squeezed his hand. "So I'll give you a chance. Want to try dating me?" Elias stared at me, speechless. "Really? Not interested?" I made a move to pull my hand away. I can always offer the chance to someone else. He immediately gripped my hand tightly, his eyes blazing. "I'm interested." I laughed and turned back to watch the fireworks. It's beautiful, I thought,